The call came at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in Scottsdale, Arizona. A neighbor had heard something. She would later describe it as a sound that didn't belong to the night. Not loud enough to be alarming, not quiet enough to ignore. Something between a gasp and a silence. She waited 4 minutes before she called 911. She would spend years wondering if 4 minutes had mattered. The first responders arrived at a well-kept rental home on a tree-lined street. The kind of street where people left their cars unlocked. The kind of street where nothing happened. The front door was unlocked. Inside, at the base of a hardwood staircase, lay the body of Maria Santos, 29 years old, Filipino-born, a registered nurse at St. Carrington Medical Center, a mother of 3 children who were, at that moment, asleep in their beds upstairs. Undisturbed, unreachable, lost in a sleep so deep it would later raise questions that nobody initially thought to ask. Maria was lying face down, one arm extended forward as though she had reached for something on the way down. One slipper was still on her foot. The other was found 4 steps up, sitting perfectly upright on the edge of the stair, as though someone had placed it there. There was no blood, no forced entry, no sign of struggle anywhere in the house. In the kitchen, on the counter, sat a half-empty glass of red wine, still slightly cold to the touch. The first officer on the scene noted in his report, "Probable accidental fall." He noted the wine. He noted the late hour. He noted the stairs, which were steep, and the hallway light, which was off. He did not note the circular absence of dust around the base of the wine glass. A clean ring that didn't match the glass itself, suggesting the glass had been moved and returned to a slightly different position. He did not note that the hallway light had a functioning bulb and that its switch was in the off position, when Maria Santos was, by every account from every person who knew her, a woman who was meticulous about leaving lights on for her children at night. He did not note these things, because at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, with a woman at the bottom of a staircase and a wine glass on the counter, the story wrote itself. Powerful stories always do, and powerful men have always known that.
If you want to uncover more chilling true crime stories and see justice exposed, subscribe to Crime Vaults as we bring light to the darkest true crime cases and never miss the secrets hidden in plain sight.
Her name, before it became a case number, before it became a folder on a detective's desk, before it became a headline that Filipino communities across America would share in WhatsApp groups with broken heart emojis and trembling hands. Her name was Maria Cristina Santos. She was born in Cebu City in the Philippines, the eldest of 3 children, to a schoolteacher mother and a father who drove a jeepney and came home every evening smelling of diesel and dedication. She was, by every account from her childhood, relentlessly determined. She graduated top of her nursing class. She passed her board exams on the first attempt. She worked 2 jobs for 4 years to afford the credential examinations that would allow her American nursing license to be recognized. She arrived in Phoenix, Arizona, at the age of 22 with 2 suitcases, a notarized folder of credentials, and $500 in a white envelope that her mother had pressed into her hands at the airport, whispering in Cebuano to be careful, to call every Sunday, to remember who she was, even when the world tried to tell her otherwise. She moved into a 2-bedroom apartment with 2 other Filipino nurses, Joy Reyes and Anne Domingo, who had come through the same recruitment agency. They split everything 3 ways: groceries, electricity, the occasional homesickness that none of them named out loud, but all of them felt every time they called home and heard voices they missed so deeply it sat in the chest like a stone. Maria threw herself into work with the particular ferocity of someone who understood exactly what it had cost to get there. She was assigned to the 4th floor of St. Carrington Medical Center, the cardiothoracic unit. She was punctual. She was thorough. She remembered patient names and family members' names, and the names of patients' dogs, because she understood that people heal faster when they feel remembered. Her colleagues liked her immediately. Her patients asked for her by name within weeks. And Dr. Richard Hale, who had walked those halls for 18 years and who noticed everything he chose to notice, noticed Maria Santos. Richard Hale was on paper an extraordinary man. He had graduated from Johns Hopkins School of Medicine at the top of his class. He had completed his residency at the Mayo Clinic and his fellowship in cardiothoracic surgery at a hospital in Boston that produced, on average, 2 department chiefs per decade. He had returned to Arizona because his wife Catherine was from Scottsdale, because her family had roots there, and because roots, at that stage of his life, had seemed like something worth honoring. He and Catherine had been married 16 years by the time Maria Santos arrived on the 4th floor. They had 2 children together, a boy named Weston, 13, and a girl named Brooke, 10. They lived in a 5-bedroom house in Paradise Valley, with a pool, a housekeeper who came on Tuesdays and Fridays, and a marriage that functioned the way expensive machinery functions when it has not been properly maintained. Smoothly, from a distance, until you looked closely at the moving parts. People who knew them socially described them as the perfect couple. People who knew them well described them more carefully. Catherine was intelligent and controlled, and had organized her entire life around a man whose schedule made him impossible to organize a life around. She had given up a career in architecture. She had given up friendships that required consistency. She had given up, piece by piece, the parts of herself that couldn't survive the particular loneliness of being married to someone who was always, in some essential way, elsewhere. She did not know about Maria Santos for a very long time. She suspected something, the way wives suspect things, not through evidence, but through the body, which registers betrayal before the mind is willing to. But Richard Hale was precise. In surgery and in deception, he operated with the same principle: control the environment, control the outcome. He wore his wedding ring to work. He spoke about Catherine in the present tense in hospital corridors, which is the simplest form of misdirection. He never brought Maria to any location where someone he knew might see them. He never used his personal phone for anything that couldn't be explained. He was, in the language of what he was doing, careful. And Maria Santos, 22 years old, 8,000 miles from her mother, alone in the vast American landscape of her ambition, Maria Santos made it easy for him to be careful. Because Maria Santos fell in love. It started with small things, the way erosion starts with small things. A coffee left on the nurse's station with her name written in his handwriting. A conversation in an elevator that ran several floors longer than it needed to. A shift that ended late and became, in the parking garage, a conversation that became something else. Something with weight to it. Something that felt, to a 22-year-old woman who had spent 4 years being invisible in the country she had worked so hard to reach, something that felt like being seen. He told her she was remarkable. He told her he had never met someone with her combination of intelligence and warmth. He told her that his marriage was something he was navigating carefully, that he and Catherine had what he described as an understanding. He used the word understanding often in those early months, and Maria heard it the way she needed to hear it, as a door rather than a wall. She told Joy Reyes later that she had known, on some level, from the beginning, that she had walked toward it anyway, that this was the part of the story she found hardest to forgive herself for, not the loving, but the knowing and loving anyway. Joy would tell investigators years later that she had warned Maria. She had sat across from her in their small kitchen and told her that men like Richard Hale did not leave their wives, that arrangements like this one always ended the same way, that Maria deserved someone who could be seen with her in the daylight. Maria had listened. She had nodded. She had refilled Joy's tea and changed the subject. And 3 months later, she told Joy she was pregnant.
The conversation happened in Richard Hale's car, in the parking garage of St. Carrington Medical Center. Level 3, Space 14B. Maria Santos would remember the location for the rest of her life. The way certain coordinates embed themselves in memory, not because they are beautiful, but because something important broke there. She told him simply. She was not dramatic about it. She had decided, on the drive to work that morning, that she would be calm, that she would give him the chance to be the man she believed he could be. Richard Hale was calm too. That was the first thing that frightened her. Not his anger, but his stillness. He sat for a moment without speaking, and then he began to speak in the measured, organized way he spoke about medical procedures. He listed options. He spoke about logistics. He used the word arrangement 3 times. He offered to handle it privately and quickly, and he made it clear, without saying it directly, that handling it quickly was his strong preference. Maria said no. She said it quietly, and she said it once. And the finality of it changed the temperature in the car. She kept the baby. Their son Daniel was born 7 months later. On the birth certificate, under father, the line was blank. Richard had not asked for this. He had required it. The money would come through a private account managed by a third party. There would be no legal connection. There would be no documentation. There would be what he called, again, an arrangement. Maria signed where she was asked to sign. She was 23 years old. She was alone. She was in love with a man who had just made her a mother and made himself, legally, a stranger to his own child. She signed, and she told herself it was temporary, that he would come around, that love, given enough time, made people brave. She would spend the next 6 years discovering that some people do not want to be made brave, that some people have arranged their entire lives around the specific avoidance of courage.
2 more children followed in the next 4 years. A daughter, Isabel, born when Maria was 25. Another son, Lucas, born when she was 27. With each pregnancy, the conversation in the parking garage repeated itself, with minor variations. Each time, Richard arrived calm and organized. Each time, he offered what he called options. Each time, Maria refused. Each time, the birth certificate was filed with a blank where a father's name belonged. Each time, money arrived in the private account without a traceable source. And each time, Richard Hale came back. This is the part of the story that is the hardest to hold, because it is the part that defies the clean narrative of villain and victim that true crime stories so often reach for. The truth was more complicated than that. Richard Hale was present in every way that couldn't be documented, and absent in every way that could be. He was there during Maria's bed rest with Lucas, arriving after dark, bringing food, sitting with her in the dim light of a house he never stayed the night in. He was at the emergency room the night Daniel had his first asthma attack, standing in the corridor where the security cameras didn't reach, because he knew where the security cameras were, and he had positioned himself accordingly. He remembered the children's birthdays. He sent gifts through the private account, purchased by an assistant who had been told only that they were for a charitable cause. He asked about their milestones during the brief, encrypted messages he and Maria exchanged on an app that deleted conversations automatically. He was, in the particular way of men who are skilled at managing their exposure, present enough to keep Maria hoping, and absent enough to never be held accountable. Joy Reyes described it this way to investigators. He kept just enough of himself available
that she could never fully let go. It wasn't love, or maybe it was his version of love, but it was also a strategy. And the strategy worked for 7 years. It worked until Daniel started school.
The school enrollment form was a standard document. 2 pages, basic fields, nothing that should have changed anything. But Daniel was 6 years old, and Daniel was serious-eyed and precise in the way children are when they have grown up watching their mother be precise. And he sat at the kitchen table beside Maria and looked at the form with the focused attention he gave to everything. And he found the blank. He asked about it, the way children ask about things that don't make sense to them, without accusation, without drama, with only the clean and devastating simplicity of a child who has not yet learned that some questions are not supposed to be asked. "All the other kids have something there," he said. Maria told him she would explain when he was older. She kept her voice steady. She finished the form. She walked him to the bus stop. She came home. And then she sat down at her kitchen table, and the 6 years of patience and compromise and quiet management of an impossible situation came apart in her chest all at once, and she cried for a very long time. When she stopped, she opened her laptop. She created a folder. She named it simply Truth. The folder took 4 weeks to compile. Maria Santos had not been careless in the years of her relationship with Richard Hale, but she had not, until now, been deliberate in the way she preserved evidence. What she had was fragmentary, accumulated not through strategy, but through instinct, the instinct of a woman who understood on some cellular level that she was living a version of her life that had no legal protection, and that this might, someday, matter. She went through her phone archives. She recovered text messages from a backup she had made 2 years earlier, before the encrypted messaging app had replaced their communication. She found a voicemail she had saved without fully understanding why. Richard's voice, unmistakable, saying, "I love you and the kids. You know that." She found photographs. Not many, and none that were explicit, but a handful that placed him in her apartment, in her kitchen, sitting on the floor with Daniel, who was an infant, a man who, officially, had no connection to that child, holding that child with the particular ease of someone who had held him many times before. She found the birthday card he had written to Daniel, signed only with the letter R, but in his handwriting she had seen on medical charts and on the coffee he had left on the nurse's station all those years ago. Handwriting she would know anywhere. She found the transfer records, not perfectly documented, not the kind of thing a forensic accountant would call clean evidence, but enough. Dates and amounts that corresponded to the children's births, to school fees, to the lease renewal on her house, money that had arrived reliably and without explanation for 6 years. She printed everything. She organized it into a binder with labeled dividers. She wrote, by hand, a timeline of the relationship, dates, locations, events, with the precision of someone who had spent years charting patient histories and understood that the sequence of events was everything. And at the back of her binder, she placed a letter she had written and never sent. It was addressed to Catherine Hale. It began, "There are things about your husband that you deserve to know. And there are children in this world who deserve to know their father's name." She placed the binder in a box under her bed. And then she called a family law attorney. The attorney's name was Sandra Okafor. She ran a small practice in Tempe, specializing in paternity cases and family law. She had heard versions of Maria's story before, not identical, never identical, but familiar in their architecture. The powerful man, the younger woman, the children who existed in the legal gap between what had happened and what could be proven. She told Maria that the case was viable, that with the evidence Maria had compiled, a paternity action could be filed. That DNA testing could establish Richard Hale as the biological father of all 3 children. That once paternity was legally established, the birth certificates could be amended. That the children had rights to his name, to support properly documented, to inheritance, to the acknowledgement that the law requires, even of men who have spent years arranging themselves out of accountability. Maria left that office with a folder of intake paperwork and something she had not felt in a very long time. Not happiness, exactly. Something quieter and more durable than happiness. Clarity. She knew what she was doing. She knew what it would cost. She had thought about it the way she thought about difficult procedures at work. Not without fear, but with fear held alongside purpose. Fear that did not override the decision, only accompanied it. She drove home. She made dinner for her children. She helped Daniel with his reading and Isabel with the puzzle she had been working on for 3 days. And she held Lucas in her lap after his bath and breathed in the smell of his hair and thought, "This is what it's for. This is why." She did not call Richard that night. She waited. She was not sure what she was waiting for exactly. Perhaps for the courage to form itself into language. Perhaps for a version of the conversation that she could imagine surviving. She waited 12 days. Then she called. Richard Hale learned she had contacted an attorney before she called him. He had, over the years, developed what might be described as an informal intelligence network. Not dramatic, not organized, simply the natural result of being a man of status in a mid-sized city's medical community. A man who had favors owed to him. A man whose name opened doors, and whose displeasure closed them. A contact at the attorney's office, not Sandra Okafor herself, who was scrupulously ethical, but someone in the orbit of the building, someone who owed Richard something, had passed along a name, an appointment, a general subject matter. He processed this information the way he processed complications in surgery. Without panic, with calculation. He called Maria from a number she didn't recognize, a prepaid phone. He had purchased it 3 weeks earlier, which told investigators later that some part of him had been anticipating this call before she made it. The conversation lasted 11 minutes. Maria's friend, Joy Reyes, knew about it only because Maria called her immediately afterward, still sitting in her car in the parking lot of a grocery store, her hands not quite steady. She told Joy that he had not threatened her, that he had not raised his voice, that he had been, from beginning to end, calm, surgical. He had told her she didn't understand what she was doing. He had told her that she was making a decision that would hurt the children, that exposure would destabilize their lives, that the arrangement they had was better for them, better for everyone, than whatever she thought a courtroom could provide. And then he had said something that Maria repeated to Joy word for word, and that Joy repeated to detectives word for word, and that would eventually be read aloud in a courtroom. He had said, "There are things that are better left alone, Maria. You know that. Some things, once they're disturbed, can't be put back." She had told him she was going forward. He had said, "I know." And then he had ended the call. The next 18 days were ordinary, and the ordinary nature of them was what made them terrible in retrospect. Maria went to work. She cared for her patients. She picked Daniel up from school and listened to him talk about his teacher and a boy in his class who had a gecko. She took Isabel to a birthday party on a Saturday and stood with the other mothers in a backyard and laughed at something one of them said, and felt for a moment entirely normal. She called her mother in Cebu on Sunday, as she always did, and told her nothing of consequence, and listened to the sound of her mother's voice, like someone drinking water in the middle of a long walk. She met with Sandra Okafor once more. The paperwork was moving forward. The DNA petition had been filed. Richard Hale would be served. It was, Sandra told her, only a matter of time. 18 days after the phone call, Maria Santos texted Joy Reyes at 2:31 a.m. "If something happens to me, check the folder. Everything is in the folder. The children deserve to know." Joy was asleep. She didn't see the message until morning. By morning, Maria was dead. The responding officer's report filed the death as a probable accidental fall at 3:14 a.m. His supervisor reviewed it at 7 a.m. and concurred. It was the kind of case that accumulated agreement the way clean surfaces accumulate dust. Quietly, incrementally, without anyone meaning for it to happen. It was Detective Rosa Menendez who requested an elevated review. She was not assigned to the case initially. She was assigned to an adjacent case and happened to be in the building when the report crossed her desk by accident. A clerical misdirection that would later strike everyone involved as the kind of coincidence that doesn't fully feel like one. She read the report 3 times. Then she went to the scene. She stood at the base of the staircase for a long time, looking at the angle of the fall, looking at the position of the body as it had been photographed, looking at the slipper that sat upright on the stair 4 steps up, with the particular, unreal neatness of something that had been placed rather than lost. She went to the kitchen. She looked at the wine glass. She looked at the counter around the wine glass. She photographed the circular absence of dust, the clean ring that didn't match the base of the glass, the mark of a glass that had been moved and replaced. A detail so small it required you to be looking for something to find it. She submitted a formal request to expand the investigation. It was approved after 2 days of procedural resistance.
The expanded investigation revealed 3 things that the initial report had not captured, and each of them, on its own, might have been explained away. But together, they formed the shape of something that could not be ignored. The first was the hallway light. It was off. The bulb was functional. Maria Santos's children, Daniel, Isabel, and Lucas, had a well-documented routine, one that Maria's daycare provider, her neighbor, and Joy Reyes all confirmed, in which Maria left a hallway light on every night without exception. She had done this since Daniel was an infant and had never stopped. 3 separate people who had stayed overnight at the house described being shown the light switch specifically, told always to leave it on. The switch was in the off position when first responders arrived. There was no reason for Maria to have turned it off. The second was the children's toxicology. It was ordered by Detective Menendez and was not part of the initial response protocol. The results showed trace antihistamines, diphenhydramine, in all 3 children, at levels consistent not with a medicinal dose, but with a sedating one. Maria Santos's medical training made it effectively impossible that she had accidentally overdosed all 3 children with an antihistamine. And there was no diphenhydramine anywhere in the house. No bottle, no packaging, no prescription. The third was the phone. Maria's phone showed a screen activity log. Between 2:31 a.m., the time of her last text to Joy, and the estimated time of death, the screen had been activated 3 times. Files had been accessed and deleted. The phone's forensic reconstruction, conducted by a specialist brought in 2 weeks into the expanded investigation, showed that 4 files had been permanently removed from the device in a 6-minute window that fell after Maria's last text and before, investigators believed, her fall. Someone had used her phone after she sent that final message. Someone had been in that house. Richard Hale had an alibi. This was not in question, and it was not, ultimately, the question that mattered. At 2:47 a.m., when Maria Santos was found at the base of her staircase, Richard Hale was in operating room 3 at St. Carrington Medical Center, performing an emergency aortic repair on a 61-year-old male patient. His scrub nurse confirmed it. The anesthesiologist confirmed it. The OR logs confirmed it, with timestamps that left no room for interpretation. He was 4 miles away, saving a life. Detective Menendez had not been looking at Richard Hale's hands for 7 years. She had been looking at them for 11 days, when she stopped, set down the OR logs, and began looking at something else entirely. She began looking at a man named Carl Dutton. Carl Dutton was 47 years old. He had spent 12 years in private security after a career in law enforcement that had ended quietly and without ceremony under circumstances that his personnel file described in language designed to obscure rather than illuminate. He ran a consulting firm that listed corporate clients and risk assessment services on its website. The website looked professional and said very little. His phone records, subpoenaed in the 3rd week of the investigation, showed 42 calls with Richard Hale's personal cell phone in the 90 days preceding Maria Santos's death. The calls increased in frequency in the final 3 weeks. The last call was placed at 11:47 p.m. on the night Maria died, 47 minutes before she sent her final text to Joy Reyes. A neighbor's security camera, mounted on a driveway 1 house north of Maria's, captured the edge of a dark SUV parked on the street at 2:19 a.m. The vehicle was gone by 2:44 a.m. The partial plate took 6 weeks and 3 separate database queries to trace. The vehicle was registered to a shell company. The shell company traced to Carl Dutton.
Carl Dutton's attorney issued a statement 48 hours before Dutton was formally brought in for questioning. The statement was careful and brief and denied everything without specifying what everything was. It was the kind of statement that is written by someone who knows what is coming and has decided the best defense is to appear ahead of it. Richard Hale did not issue a statement. His attorney did, and it was longer and more elaborate and centered on Richard's alibi, which was not in dispute, and on his reputation, which was considerable, and on the absence of any direct evidence connecting him to Maria Santos's death, which was, at that moment, accurate. The DNA petition that Sandra Okafor had filed before Maria's death did not die with her. The law does not require the living to complete what the dead have begun, and Sandra Okafor was not the kind of attorney who closed the file because the situation had become complicated. She continued. She argued that the children had standing. She argued that a deceased mother's petition did not expire with her. She argued this before a family court judge who took 3 weeks to deliberate and then agreed. Richard Hale's DNA was compelled by court order. The results came back on a Thursday afternoon. He was the biological father of all 3 children. The folder survived because Maria Santos had understood, in some part of herself she may not have been able to fully articulate, that the folder could not stay in her house. 3 days before she died, she drove to Joy Reyes' apartment. It was a Sunday evening. She brought food, the way she always brought food when she came unannounced, because she had been raised in a house where you did not arrive at someone's door empty-handed. She and Joy ate together, and they talked about nothing important, and then Maria retrieved the binder from the bag she had brought and slid it under Joy's bed without elaborate explanation. She said, "If I ever ask for it back in person, give it to me. If anyone else asks, even me by phone, call this number first." She wrote Sandra Okafor's number on a piece of paper and pressed it into Joy's hand. Joy told investigators she had not been alarmed, exactly.
that Maria had seemed calm, that she had seemed, if anything, settled, the way people sometimes seem settled when they have made a decision and are living on the right side of it. She had said goodbye at the door the way she always said goodbye. She had told Joy she would call on Wednesday. She had walked down the hallway toward the elevator. Joy had watched her go. 4 days later, when the official verdict was still accidental fall, and Joy was sitting on her kitchen floor, unable to stop shaking, she called Sandra Okafor's number. Sandra Okafor answered on the second ring.
The binder was logged as evidence on the Monday morning. It was photographed, inventoried, and analyzed over the following 3 weeks by a team that included a financial forensics expert, a handwriting analyst, and a digital forensics consultant who worked to verify the authenticity of the screenshots Maria had preserved. The voicemail was verified. The handwriting on Daniel's birthday card was matched. The transfer records were traced painstakingly through the shell account structure Richard had constructed, which was sophisticated, but not, as it turned out, sophisticated enough to survive the scrutiny of someone who was specifically and methodically looking. Carl Dutton agreed to a plea arrangement 14 months after Maria's death. The terms were sealed. He did not testify publicly. He did not explain, in any forum that became part of the public record, what exactly had happened in that house between 2:19 a.m. and 2:44 a.m. on the night Maria Santos died. Richard Hale's trial lasted 11 days. The prosecution's case rested on the phone records connecting him to Dutton, the financial records connecting him to Maria, the forensic evidence from the house, and the DNA results that established what he had spent 7 years legally erasing, that he was the father of 3 children whose mother was now dead. His defense rested on his alibi, his reputation, and the argument that circumstantial evidence, however substantial in aggregate, did not constitute proof of the specific crime charged. The jury deliberated for 3 days. The verdict was read on a Thursday afternoon in a courtroom in Maricopa County. The room was full. Maria Santos's mother, Lourdes, had flown from Cebu for the final week of the trial. She sat in the front row of the gallery, small and still, wearing a black dress and holding a photograph of Maria that she had printed and laminated. A photograph from Maria's nursing school graduation, the day Maria had worn her first uniform and stood straight in front of the camera with the expression of someone who had decided that the distance between where they were and where they were going was simply something to be crossed. Daniel, Isabel, and Lucas were not in the courtroom. They were 6 miles away, in the home of a family advocate who had been assigned to their case, doing the ordinary things that children do in the afternoon: homework, a snack, a television program, in the tender obliviousness that adults work very hard to provide for children who have experienced the unworkable. They would be told, in language appropriate to their ages, by a child psychologist who had been working with them for 9 months. They would understand pieces of it, and not understand other pieces, and would spend years understanding more. The verdict, when it came, was read by a clerk in a flat, administrative voice that gave nothing away until the final word. Guilty. Richard Hale stood without expression when it was read. His attorney placed a hand briefly on his arm. Catherine Hale, who had sat through the trial every day in the 3rd row of the gallery, absorbing information about the parallel life of her marriage with the specific stillness of someone who has chosen to feel things later, rose quietly and left the courtroom before the room had fully processed what it had heard. She did not look back. 13 months after Maria Santos fell at the base of her staircase on a quiet street in Scottsdale, Arizona, or was carried there, or was arranged there, in the terrible vocabulary of what the evidence suggested, 3 children had their birth certificates amended by order of the Maricopa County Family Court. Daniel Richard Hale, Isabel Maria Hale, Lucas Santos Hale. because Lucas's middle name had been Santos after his mother, and his grandmother Lourdes had asked that it remain, and the court had agreed. They would carry both names now. His, which the law required, hers, which Lourdes had quietly insisted upon, because she understood that names are not just identifiers, but inheritances, and she wanted her grandchildren to inherit their mother, alongside whatever else the world had decided they were entitled to. Maria Santos had gone to work every day in a country that had taken years to recognize her credentials. She had navigated loneliness and love and the specific vulnerability of building a life in a place that hadn't been built for you. She had loved a man who was skilled at making himself only as present as was convenient. She had raised 3 children, largely alone. She had paid her bills and called her mother every Sunday and remembered her patients' names and left the hallway light on so her children would not be afraid in the dark. And then, at 29 years old, she had decided that her children deserved to know who they were, that the blank on a legal document was not a neutrality, but a wound, that the arrangement he had required, the arrangement she had endured, the arrangement that had protected him and cost her everything, was over. That decision was what got her killed. And it was also, in the end, what made certain that the killing could not be contained. Because Maria Santos had known, in the way people know things they cannot entirely explain, that the folder could not stay in the house, that Joy needed to have it, that Sandra Okafor's number needed to be written on a piece of paper and pressed into a friend's hand on a Sunday evening, over food and ordinary conversation, just in case. She had known, and she had prepared, and the preparation survived her. Joy Reyes still works as a nurse. She transferred to a different hospital after the trial. She has said in interviews that she thinks about Maria every day. Not the end of the story, but the middle of it. The kitchen table, the tea, the Sunday phone calls home, the way Maria laughed, which was, by every account, a complete and generous laugh, the kind that made other people feel welcome inside the moment. Lourdes Santos returned to Cebu after the sentencing. She calls her grandchildren every Sunday, because that is what her daughter did, and she is not ready to let that particular rhythm die. The calls are sometimes easy and sometimes hard, and are always, in the most fundamental sense, necessary. Daniel is 9 now. He is still serious-eyed. He still asks questions that are precisely the right questions in precisely the wrong moments, in the way of children who will grow up to require the truth from the world and not understand why the world is sometimes reluctant to provide it. He knows his mother's name. He knows what she did. He knows she chose him, chose all 3 of them, over every easier and safer thing she could have chosen. He will spend his whole life understanding what that means. And perhaps, in whatever way is available to the people who loved her, and the people who will love them, perhaps that is enough. Perhaps it is exactly enough.